The day I walked into that room, I knew something had shifted. There was a tension in the air, a silence too heavy for casual conversation, but I didn't know yet how much my life would pivot on what I was about to see. I expected my husband to be there, of course, but alone, as he usually was. I expected the routine, the slight nod, the half-hearted smile, the casual banter, but instead what I walked into was a scene that split my chest open in a way no argument ever could. He wasn't alone. A woman was there with him, not just any woman, but someone I immediately recognized from the subtle power she carried, from the way she moved with confidence and ease, laughing softly as he mirrored her gestures. And there I was, frozen at the doorway, watching the man I had trusted, loved, and shared decades of life with lean in toward another woman as if our entire marriage had been a chapter he was ready to close. The initial rush was a mix of shock and disbelief. My mind froze, yet every nerve in my body was alive, alert, trembling. My heartbeat sounded like a drum, and my stomach twisted into knots. I wanted to run, to scream, to demand answers, but my legs refused to obey any command. I realized then that I was witnessing not just a betrayal, but an unveiling of truths I hadn't allowed myself to confront until this very moment. I stepped in quietly, hoping for some rational explanation, some miracle that would dissolve the horror in front of me. My presence, however, didn't matter. He barely noticed me. His eyes lingered on her in a way they hadn't on me in years. And when finally he did see me, the look he gave was a mixture of guilt and annoyance, as if my very existence in that moment was an inconvenience. What is this? I managed, my voice almost a whisper, catching in my throat. He looked away, unable, or unwilling, to meet my gaze. It's nothing, he said, almost too quickly. Nothing. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. Nothing. I was standing there seeing him with someone else, and he called it nothing. For a moment, I felt the urge to collapse, to let the walls of my composure crumble, to let my tears fall freely. But something deeper stirred within me, a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time, a spark that had been dimmed by years of routine, of compromise, of putting myself last. I realized then that I could either allow this moment to destroy me or transform me. As the initial shock began to settle, my awareness shifted. I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. The curve of my own body, the way my presence in the room commanded attention even when ignored, the subtle strength that lingered in my posture and gaze. I saw the power I had long neglected, buried under years of loyalty and expectations. And in that moment of betrayal, I understood something vital. This was my turning point. I stepped forward, fully conscious of every movement. The air around me seemed to thicken with a new energy, one that was not born of anger alone, but of realization. He noticed then, of course, the subtle shift in my demeanor, the way I carried myself differently, caught his attention. He was startled, perhaps a little afraid, and I smiled inwardly at that thought. I didn't have to speak yet. The room, the moment, the energy, it was speaking for me. I left the room quietly, without a word, letting the silence behind me speak louder than any argument ever could. In the solitude of my bedroom, I allowed myself to feel pain, yes, but also a rising tide of awareness. I thought about what had been, what was, and what could be. I thought about the years I had given, the love I had poured, and the boundaries I had allowed him to overstep, not just with me, but with himself. It wasn't just about him leaving me in that moment. It was about the fact that I had let my identity dissolve into the roles assigned to me, wife, caretaker, supporter, without realizing that I had a separate, vibrant self waiting to be claimed. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who had been overlooked but not broken, a woman whose power was quiet but undeniable. That evening, I decided to take control. I started small. I dressed with intention, choosing clothes that highlighted not just my figure, but my confidence. I practiced standing tall, letting my posture communicate what words could not. I moved through the house with a grace I hadn't allowed myself to exhibit in years, feeling the subtle thrill of being observed without demanding attention, of existing in my own space with unapologetic pride. I remembered moments in our marriage when I had been dismissed, ignored, or undervalued, and I realized that the fault had never been mine. I had allowed it to happen because I believed I had to, because I thought my worth was tied to his approval. But no longer. I felt a stirring excitement, not for him, not for revenge, but for myself, for the woman I was reclaiming. The next few days were transformative. I explored parts of myself that had been dormant, the way I smiled at strangers, the way I carried a subtle allure in casual glances, the way I allowed my presence to be felt without saying a word. I reconnected with friends I had drifted away from, laughing freely, speaking openly, and reclaiming the joy that had been muted under years of compromise. And yes, there was a sexual undertone to this awakening. I recognized it as part of my power, a magnetic energy that radiated not to manipulate but to affirm. I felt it when I walked into a room, when someone looked at me with curiosity or admiration. I felt it when I realized that I could command attention, not out of neediness, but out of sheer presence. The betrayal that had once threatened to shatter me became the catalyst for discovering a sensual confidence I had denied myself. One evening, I went out alone, choosing a small, intimate restaurant where I could observe and enjoy the company of strangers without expectation. The subtle glances, the unspoken acknowledgments, the awareness of my own allure, all of it heightened my sense of self. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in decades. I realized that power was not about control over others, but about mastery over oneself, about understanding one's own value, and refusing to let anyone diminish it. Meanwhile, he began to notice small comments, hesitant attempts at conversation, subtle apologies that lacked sincerity. But by then, I was no longer the woman who needed his validation. I had discovered a strength that existed independently of him. I had learned that desire and confidence could coexist, that attraction was as much about presence as it was about appearance, and that empowerment came from owning both without shame. I started exploring opportunities that had always been out of reach: professional, personal, and social. I joined a writing group, attended art exhibits, took classes I had once been too timid to pursue. Everywhere I went, I carried this new energy, this awareness of my own power, and I began to realize that life had far more to offer than I had allowed myself to believe. And in the quiet moments when I reflected on that day, the day he left me, I felt gratitude. Grateful not for the betrayal itself, but for the awakening it forced. I felt pride in the woman I was becoming, in the sensuality, strength, and independence I had reclaimed. I understood that power was not about revenge or seduction, but about recognition: recognition of one's own worth, one's own desires, and one's own ability to command life on one's own terms. Over time, I began to navigate new relationships, encounters, and experiences with a clear sense of self. I wasn't seeking validation, I was seeking resonance, connection, moments that honored my essence. And when he attempted to reinsert himself into my life, I met him with calm detachment. I saw the man who had underestimated me, who had failed to see the woman who had always existed, and I understood that I had moved beyond the need to fix, explain, or plead. I had grown, and that growth was irresistible, undeniable, and entirely mine. In the end, it wasn't about him at all. It was about me. It was about discovering that betrayal could be transformed into empowerment, that heartbreak could evolve into self realization, and that the most potent form of allure came from authenticity, confidence, and unapologetic presence. I learned that desire was not a tool for manipulation, but a reflection of embracing one's own energy fully. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the woman in the room with him, the fleeting figure who had triggered the awakening. I felt no jealousy, no bitterness, only a quiet acknowledgement that her presence had been necessary for my own rebirth. I had been forced to confront my complacency, to recognize the power I had allowed to lie dormant, and to claim it fully. And as I drifted into sleep, I felt a thrill unlike any I had known before. Not the thrill of attraction, Not the thrill of revenge, but the thrill of being fully, unapologetically myself. The day my husband left me, I didn't just survive, I transformed. I discovered a power that had always been mine, waiting patiently for me to finally see it, embrace it, and let it shine. From that moment forward, my life became a tapestry of choices I made for myself, moments I savored for myself, and experiences that celebrated the woman I had always been, now fully awakened. And in every reflection, every encounter, every glance that met mine with curiosity or admiration, I was reminded of one immutable truth. My power was not borrowed, not conditional, not dependent on anyone else. It was, and always had been, my own. And so I walked forward, confident, sensual, unafraid, and fully alive, knowing that the woman I had discovered was unstoppable, magnetic, and entirely unapologetically mine.